The snow-white peaks of Everest rise very close before the couple, Robert and Maria. Behind them are 8 years of persistent training for a single goal: to prove to the world that vegans can handle any challenge, even the most physically demanding. Just a little more, and they would be the first to reach this summit. But where else, if not in the death zone, can anything go wrong at any moment and lead to irreversible consequences? Maria Stridham was born in South Africa. From childhood, she was drawn to both nature and numbers. Order, formulas, and calculations were as alive to her as the world around her. She earned a bachelor's degree in finance and, at the age of 21, moved to Australia. There, she taught at a business school and soon met Robert Gropel. Like Maria, he was a vegan, in love with nature, and he and Maria became inseparable. Robert had loved mountaineering since childhood. He climbed his first small peak at the age of 8, and Maria happily shared his hobby. Over the next 5 years, she gained experience on various small peaks, learned to work in a rope team, and together they saved money. And a lot of it was needed to make a bold statement in 2008. They set out to conquer the 7 summits. These are the 7 highest peaks on each of the 7 continents: Elbrus in Europe, Kilimanjaro in Africa, Denali, also known as Mount McKinley, in North America, Aconcagua in South America, Vinson in Antarctica, Jaya in Australia and Oceania, and of course Chomolungma, also known as Everest, in Asia. For them, this was not just a prestigious mountaineering achievement, but a mission to show the world that vegans can endure absolutely any physical challenge. Remember, veganism, unlike vegetarianism, involves abstaining not only from meat, but from all animal products, such as eggs and milk, and from the use of leather or wool. At the time, there was a widespread belief that without protein-rich foods, a climber could not handle such heavy physical demands. Maria disliked the fact that in society, vegans were often seen as undernourished weaklings, and they decided to disprove this stereotype and create a precedent to convince the world. Their journey began on Maria's home continent with the enormous Kilimanjaro. Its height is 5,895 meters, which made it a logical start for their mission. Although it is not as high as the other 7 summits, it is very easy to underestimate, and in the end, half of climbers do not reach the summit, especially if they choose short routes or move too fast, not allowing proper time to acclimatize. However, Rob and Maria succeeded, and standing proudly on the famous Uhuru Peak, they were inspired to conquer the next summit, Denali in Alaska. Its height is 6,190 meters, and the climate is nothing like Africa's. Denali has extremely unpredictable weather. Temperatures drop to severe negatives, and if anything goes wrong, helicopters likely cannot reach the site. Nevertheless, Rob and Maria managed again. This alone was a solid reason for pride and a strong statement that vegan is not synonymous with weakling, but nothing could stop this couple. Their entire project was based on the idea that the body can achieve the impossible if one understands its characteristics and works with them, not against them. Each of us has our own physiology. Some people handle high altitudes easily. Some recover faster from physical exertion, or metabolize nutrients differently. Next on their plan was South America, where the sun-scorched Argentine desert rose toward the curved ridge of Aconcagua. Its height is almost 7,000 meters, and the couple managed it as well. And here, apparently, to avoid trivial pursuits, in 2016, Rob and Maria decided to climb Everest immediately and joined a group of 10 other experienced climbers. They had every reason to consider themselves extremely well prepared. This preparation allowed them to successfully reach Camp 4, the last stop before the summit push. Reaching Camp 4 meant they had successfully navigated the shifting ice peaks of the Khumbu Icefall and crossed the dangerous slope of the South Col, where one mistake could mean being found years later frozen in a fall position. Most likely, they had not slept for 1 to 2 days and had lost about 11 pounds. And in the death zone, you start losing even more, because the stomach cannot digest food with such oxygen deprivation. At Camp 4, the group gathered in a tent to prepare for the final push to the summit. The world outside the tent felt like impenetrable darkness with biting cold winds. Staggering against gusts, the group secured ropes and joined the long queue for the ascent. The summit push began before dawn, around 9 p.m., so that the most dangerous part of the route, the descent, would take place during daylight. Rob and Maria moved carefully but quickly, focusing on each step, unable even to look at each other. The sunrise touched the peaks at 4 a.m., and by 8 a.m. the summit seemed within arm's reach. Robert was filled with joy and anticipation and wanted to share it with Maria, but she could not even smile back. At the sight of her shrunken figure, Rob realized she was so exhausted she could barely stand. Even the seeming closeness of the goal could no longer give her strength, especially since they had to move fast and save every minute of daylight and time in the death zone. Everyone realized Maria could go no further. The choice was up to Robert. He hesitated, trying to gather his thoughts, but mental concentration in the death zone is extremely difficult. He looked at the summit again, then at his wife, and quietly asked, "Do you mind if I go on?" Maria replied, "Yes, go ahead. I'll wait for you here." With these words, she detached from the group and stayed on the south peak, waiting for Rob to return. Meanwhile, Robert thought the summit was only about 15 minutes away, but he completely underestimated the difficulty of the approaches. He faced careful movement along a narrow rocky ridge and the almost traditional human bottleneck at the Hillary Step. What he estimated as 15 minutes actually took 1.5 to 2 hours. Finally, he reached a small sunlit platform at the very summit, spread his arms, and unfurled the green vegan flag that he and Maria had dreamed of raising together. Nearby, his group members cheered. Robert later said he had simply climbed the summit quickly and descended. Did he realize how exhausted his brain was from oxygen deprivation and how distorted his sense of time was? There is no exact data on how long he spent on the summit, but it was certainly brief for 2 reasons. First, that year, a record number of climbers, 209, reached the summit, and the platform needed to be cleared for those approaching. Second, every minute in the death zone is precious, and the team had to begin descent as soon as possible. On the way back, Robert hurried to the south peak to reach Maria. Deep down, he hoped she had rested and perhaps even followed them, and he would meet her lower down at Camp 4. But in the death zone, resting is practically impossible. No body system can recover under such conditions. With every minute, she only became more exhausted. When Robert did not see his wife on the south peak, he was genuinely alarmed. He knew only one Sherpa remained with her while the other 2 followed him, and he could only hope Maria had started her descent, and they would meet at Camp 4. By this point, Robert could have also begun to worry about himself. He was feeling worse, and it was his turn to drag his feet. He barely kept up with the group, seeing almost nothing ahead, when they found Maria sitting on the snow. Robert perked up slightly and approached her, but Maria was unable to speak, only whispering something unintelligible, apparently hallucinating. He tried to help her stand, but he himself needed assistance, not just to walk, but even to stay conscious. The group and the Sherpas took over the descent. They guided her down, taking turns, while she did not even know where she was. Then she stopped moving her legs and had to be carried. In such conditions, no one could constantly nudge or shake Robert to keep him awake, and he fell behind. He continued, falling asleep on the go. Passing climbers woke him, and he repeatedly asked them to check his oxygen. They told him he was out of oxygen and would die if he didn't get up. He struggled to rise, moved 10 more meters, fell asleep again, and repeated the process. Deep into the night, the group finally brought Maria to Camp 4. They had all spent over 30 hours in the death zone, with Robert slightly longer. The relatively safe limit is 16 to 20 hours, making this critical, especially for those unlucky in the biological lottery, whose vessels fail under pressure and leak fluid into the lungs and brain. This extreme manifestation of altitude sickness was beginning for Maria as they approached the summit. At Camp 4, Maria was placed in a tent and given supplemental oxygen brought by the Sherpas. Robert, recovering slightly, finally regained some ability to think and suddenly remembered a syringe of dexamethasone in his backpack. This steroid, which I can say from experience is quite miraculous, is used to relieve acute mountain sickness symptoms and can even restrain brain swelling. He immediately injected Maria. With oxygen and dexamethasone, Maria regained consciousness and even spoke a little with her husband. But the rule of high-altitude climbing says the only cure for mountain sickness is descent. Resting in the camp was impossible. It is also a death zone, and every minute at such altitude counts. The Sherpas made the only right decision, to carry her down immediately without breaks. She needed to reach at least Camp 3, 7,200 meters, or better, Camp 2, 6,400 meters, where air density was slightly higher and helicopters could reach. Maria could barely move her legs, and doctors recommended keeping her conscious and moving. But just 2 hours after leaving the camp, on the Geneva Spur section, Maria collapsed and lost consciousness. Robert, nearly fainting, crawled to her, hugged her, and shook her, but nothing could help. She died in his arms just 2 hours from Camp 3. Robert barely comprehended what was happening, and the Sherpas had to leave her body on the route and focus on saving Robert. This is the harsh pragmatism of the mountains. You cannot save the dead, and all efforts go to saving the living. He was disoriented, his lungs filling with fluid faster, and he could become the next corpse within an hour, if not brought down. He was literally dragged down from his wife's body to Camp 3 for oxygen, then to Camp 2. The Sherpas worked a miracle. After 30 grueling hours in the death zone, carrying Maria, they managed to bring down Robert too, saving his life. Often, Sherpas die from exhaustion in such situations. Honestly, I would love to see photos of these heroes alongside those of clients. There are photos of Maria and Robert, but not of these incredible Sherpas. At Camp 2, conditions allowed helicopter access, and Robert, in a near comatose state, was evacuated to Kathmandu. He was saved physically first, then psychologically. He blamed himself for his wife's death. He said it was his duty as a husband to protect her and bring her home. In fact, he decided to fulfill this duty even after her death, and refused to leave Kathmandu before arranging Maria's descent to Australia. She remained at 7,700 meters, from where bodies are usually unretrievable. But she was on a safe part of the route, and it was decided to attempt it. 5 days and $30,000 were spent to bring her body to Camp 2, from where a helicopter could retrieve it. And the most ironic part, there was no record. The first vegan to climb Everest did it exactly 1 day before Rob. He was an engineer-programmer from Mumbai named Kuntal Jayashar. He used not only a vegan diet but fully vegan equipment, without down or leather elements. Jayashar, by the way, sympathized deeply with Maria and Robert's tragedy. He believed any attempt to link it to a vegan diet was clickbait, and rightly noted that about 330 people died on Everest, all meat-eaters. But suddenly, something goes wrong with one vegan, and the whole world talks about it. In fact, vegans can achieve anything just like others, as shown by Kuntal's success, Robert's relative success, and a number of previous climbs by Robert and Maria. Yes, climbing consumes enormous energy, and a climber may lose up to 22 pounds in one ascent. But if you combine plant proteins and supplement what is missing, such as vitamin B12, which helps red blood cells carry oxygen to organs, the body will be fine. Some critical nutrients for high-altitude performance from plant sources are absorbed slightly less efficiently, like iron, or are present in smaller amounts than in animal protein like zinc, selenium, calcium, and these must be monitored and supplemented separately. The question is whether it was worth the sacrifices. Although looking at Robert and Maria's life, it seems it was first about passion, second about a mission. Robert described his wife as a perfect person, calling her his idol, his hero, his motivation. After her death, he could not even look at her photos calmly. Climbing Everest had nothing special for him because she was not there. I just climbed up and down quickly, but it meant nothing because we were supposed to do it together. Less than 2 years after Maria's death, Hubert set a record, becoming the first climber to complete the 7 summits. He seems incredibly strong and unstoppable, as shortly after, he crossed Greenland on foot in a month, hauling loads totaling 165 pounds. A year later, he completed a similar journey in Antarctica, covering around 311 miles, then climbed 7 volcanic peaks. Now he has a new partner, Jules, who is also vegan, and his life goes on. Comment below. What would you have done in Rob's place if, approaching the summit of your dream, your partner suddenly felt ill? Would your decisions differ if it were in the death zone versus a safer location? And what if it were not husband and wife, but, for example, just a climbing partner? See you next time, friends.